The clerk recognizes the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Stefanik.
Madam Clerk, on behalf of the House Republican Conference, I rise today to nominate the gentleman from California, Kevin McCarthy, as Speaker of the House to lead America's new Republican majority. In just 2 years of failed one-party Democrat rule, the American people have suffered from a historic border crisis, rampant crime, crippling inflation, rising energy costs, runaway debt, unconstitutional attacks on our fundamental freedoms, and weakness at home and abroad. The people across this great nation spoke loudly and clearly that they wanted a new direction. They wanted a new direction to stop this radical far-left agenda, to hold Joe Biden accountable, and to save the United States of America. Under Kevin McCarthy's leadership, House Republicans drafted a bold vision to put our nation back on track. Our commitment to America is a promise to the American people that this new Republican majority will stand up for an economy that's strong, a nation that's safe, a future that's built upon freedom, and a government that's accountable to the people. Kevin McCarthy is the proud son of a firefighter and a fourth-generation Californian from Kern County. Home to wildcatters, frontiersmen, and the right stuff, Bakersfield embodies the American spirit to work hard and dream big. This spirit that built our great nation is what we need in our next speaker. Kevin McCarthy is a strong conservative. He is proudly pro-life, a supporter of our Second Amendment rights, and he is committed to stopping wasteful government spending and shrinking the size of government. When Republicans last held the majority, Kevin helped to reduce domestic spending and lower the tax burden on hardworking American families. And as our Republican leader over the past several years, Kevin has taken the fight to one-party Democrat rule on behalf of the American people. He helped bring this historic border crisis to the national consciousness, a crisis Kevin made sure Democrats could no longer ignore. He fought for and succeeded in repealing the ill-advised military COVID vaccine mandate, and he stood on this very floor and spoke for a record 8 hours and 35 minutes to not only delay the vote in the House, but to make the case that ultimately defeated Joe Biden and House Democrats' dangerous Build Back Broke legislation. No one in this body has worked harder for this Republican majority than Kevin McCarthy. Since the day Kevin was elected as our leader, House Republicans have only gained seats and won. While Republicans in the Senate and state legislatures lost seats, House Republicans are the only ones who have consistently won, because Kevin knows what we stand for, he knows when we should engage in the fight, and he knows how to build consensus. Importantly, Kevin has done the work of listening to all Americans, traveling to nearly every district in this country, fighting for conservative values and fighting for the people that are committed to upholding them. Kevin has shown up in these communities of every member in our conference, and I can guarantee he has shown up in the districts of many of our colleagues across the aisle as well. His relentless effort has yielded an extraordinary new House Republican majority that represents our country's greatness from all walks of life. When the last Congress gavelled in 2 years ago, every new Republican welcomed to our conference was a woman, veteran, or minority. Today's House Republican Conference is the most diverse Republican conference in our nation's history. A seasoned legislator, an experienced leader, a friend to so many of us, a proud conservative with a tireless work ethic, Kevin McCarthy has earned this speakership of the People's House. Madam Clerk, as the chair of the Republican Conference, it is my high honor to present our conference's nominee for election to the office of Speaker of the People's House, the Honorable Kevin McCarthy from the state of California, and I yield back.
Classified documents were found in Vice President Mike Pence's home. Are House Republicans planning to investigate that, or do you see a difference with how President Biden and Pence have handled their classified document situation?
I think the facts are important here, and rather than reading this through the lens of the headlines, getting to the facts are important. In the case of Vice President Mike Pence, he came forward and proactively reached out and is following the process. In the case of Joe Biden, he has had classified documents going back to his time in the Senate, where he started serving before I was born. So this is a long-standing national security threat, setting aside the very important fact that Hunter Biden also had access and used as his home address where those classified documents were improperly and illegally stored. This will be a part of the oversight agenda, and on the House Intelligence Committee, we absolutely want to make sure we have all of the facts.
Is there a concern, we've seen it with former President Donald Trump, with Biden, with Pence, that some of the top leaders just aren't handling classified information at all? Should there be some sort of reforms with how the top leaders have access to that information?
Well, let's highlight the difference here in what the consequences have been. You had the FBI raid Mar-a-Lago. You did not see any of that happen for President Joe Biden, who illegally did this. What also is different is President Trump, as president, has the right to declassify documents. So the media should cover the fact that the FBI has been weaponized against President Trump and clearly has covered up for sitting President Joe Biden.
And to finish up on that, now we'll go to other questions, but to finish up on that, number one, President Trump had been working with National Archives and put those documents under lock and key that the FBI then broke through to go get those, and then leaked photos. They laid the documents out on the floor and they leaked photos out. Anybody asked where the leaked photos of the Vice President, at the time, Biden's documents that he had in his garage? I haven't seen those leaked photos. And also the fact that Justice had that information prior to the election and sat on it and covered it up until after the election. There are a lot of questions, obviously, that are raised where there are big differences.
This week, House Republicans are working to end Joe Biden's assault on American energy independence and restore our depleted strategic petroleum reserves. For far too long, Joe Biden has risked America's national security and drained our strategic petroleum reserves to cover up for his anti-American energy agenda. The SPR is for emergencies, not Joe Biden's political points. Our strategic petroleum reserves oil is only supposed to be used for national security events, but Joe Biden has sold nearly 40% of our stockpile since being elected. In fact, Joe Biden has sold off more of our oil reserves than every U.S. president in history combined. Today, our crucial emergency oil reserves are at the lowest level in my lifetime. As a result, China now has the world's largest government-controlled stockpile of oil, and Joe Biden and his administration have no plan to reverse course. Under an open rule, this week, House Republicans will continue to implement our commitment to America. This week, we will pass a bill to prevent abuse of the SPR and require Joe Biden to put forth a plan to increase domestic production. It is long past time to unleash American energy and restore our standing on the world stage. House Republicans will hold the Biden administration accountable for tying the hands of America's oil and gas producers in the midst of an energy crisis. We will deliver on our promise to defend our energy security, to support an economy that's strong. And with that, I want to yield to one of our members who is very active on energy issues, August Pfluger from Texas.
Got a few others joining us.
Good morning. This week, House Republicans are voting on legislation to restore our constitutional rights and freedoms after 2 long years of Democrats' COVID-19 power grab policies. The extended COVID lockdowns, like the ones we saw in my home state of New York, caused irreparable damage to our children's development, financial strain on our small businesses, and unnecessary deaths among our most vulnerable seniors due to former disgraced Governor Andrew Cuomo's deadly and fatal nursing home order. Under the guise of COVID-19, Democrats' authoritarian policies weaponized the federal government, forced unconstitutional vaccine mandates, and cost hundreds of billions in waste and abuse of Americans' hard-earned taxpayer dollars. This week, House Republicans will pass a bill that will force the federal government to acknowledge what the American people already know: the pandemic is over. In addition, the Freedom for Healthcare Workers Act will end the unconstitutional COVID-19 vaccine mandates that cost our healthcare workers who bravely served on the front lines in the wake of the pandemic. It cost them their livelihoods and caused a crisis of staffing shortages nationwide. House Republicans will also pass the Show Up Act. Americans across the country show up to work every day. There is no reason why federal employees should not be held to the same standard. House Republicans will deliver on our promises to hold Democrats accountable for their failed COVID-19 policies. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Tonight, in his State of the Union, Joe Biden must answer for his failed leadership, whether it's the border crisis continuing to rage at our southern border, crushing inflation and over $30 trillion in national debt, or a balloon from communist China entering into the United States sovereign airspace. Joe Biden has caused a crisis in America. This is why Americans spoke clearly in November. Our families cannot afford Joe Biden's failed far-left Democrat policies. In the new House Republican majority, we have already hit the ground running, working on behalf of the American people to provide critical checks and oversight on the Biden administration and deliver on our legislative agenda, the commitment to America, an economy that's strong, a nation that's safe, a future that's built on freedom, and a government that's accountable. In just the first few weeks, we have reopened the people's house, defended America's energy security, protected the sanctity of life, defunded Joe Biden's IRS army, ended Joe Biden's COVID-19 power grab, and established select committees to address the Chinese Communist Party's malign influence and the weaponization of the federal government. As Joe Biden makes our nation less safe with his failed far-left policies, I am honored to highlight the important work of our upstate New York law enforcement by inviting Montgomery County Sheriff Jeff Smith as my State of the Union guest this evening. House Republicans will continue to hold Joe Biden accountable and deliver on our promises to the American people. And as we've been doing every week, we are highlighting our newly elected freshman members. And that freshman member today is Monica De La Cruz from Texas's 15th District.
I recognize the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Stefanik.
I want to echo the chairman. Thank you, Ms. Parker, for your extraordinary service and your courage for being here today. Mr. Turley, I want to start with you. The Twitter files laid bare for the American people what you correctly call unconstitutional, quote, censorship by surrogate. Matt Taibbi writes, quote, Twitter's contact with the FBI was constant and pervasive as if it were a subsidiary. Do you agree with that assessment?
I do. What we know on the record so far shows a relationship that goes beyond this sort of informal exchange of ideas.
You're correct. In fact, isn't it true that leading up to the 2020 election, Twitter had weekly meetings with not just the FBI, with DOJ, with DHS, with DNI, to conduct this unconstitutional censorship by surrogate? We know that because of the Twitter files, correct?
Correct.
And it was not just meetings, not just censorship of stories like the Hunter Biden laptop story. We also now know that the FBI paid Twitter over $3.4 million of taxpayer funds to censor these stories before the 2020 election. Is that correct?
That money was paid. Twitter confirmed that.
And the Twitter files are just the tip of the iceberg because there's so much more. There was a corrupt revolving door at the highest levels between the FBI and Twitter. Look no further than Jim Baker, former general counsel at the FBI who helped unlawfully investigate Donald Trump in the 2016 election. Or look at Jim Comey's deputy chief of staff, who became the director of strategy at Twitter. Isn't it true, according to the Twitter files, that there were so many FBI officials who then went to work at Twitter that created their own Slack channel and crib sheet for onboarding? The Twitter files confirm that, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware, as the American people are aware, that according to polling, of the people that were made aware of the Hunter Biden laptop story, 53% would have changed their vote, including 61% of Democrats. This is the definition of election meddling, and it's the definition of election meddling by the FBI on behalf of Democrats, paid for by the U.S. taxpayers. It's collusion, it's corruption, and it's unconstitutional. Ms. Parker, I want to go to you next about your experience at the FBI, because this is not just about the Twitter files, which folks are focused on because of the news it made. It's about a systemic rot in the culture and the politicization of the leadership of the FBI, and it needs to be rooted out. Let's take a step back. Let's look at the targeting illegally of parents who wanted to stand up for their kids at school board meetings. On September 29, 2021, the National School Boards Association sent a letter to Joe Biden equating parents at school board meetings to domestic terrorists. And on October 4th, Attorney General Merrick Garland issued a memorandum to the FBI and U.S. attorneys that the department would use federal enforcement tools to target and prosecute these parents. Do you consider parents as domestic terrorists?
I do not consider parents as domestic terrorists. No, I do not.
No, and neither do the American people. But there's more to this story. It goes back further than that initial letter on September 29th, because the letter didn't happen organically. It was solicited. It was solicited by the White House and by the Secretary of Education. Essentially, the Biden administration laid the predicate for which it used to justify illegally targeting the American people, targeting these parents. Is it proper protocol, as a former FBI officer, to set that predicate, to manufacture the reasoning to justify opening an investigation?
I believe that no one should be targeted for free speech and that violence should never be tolerated under any circumstance, but it should definitely not, no one should be targeted because they want to speak up at a school board meeting.
This was a setup, and it was the setup, and it's the real definition of weaponization of the government against the American people. And it's not just this example of targeting parents at School Boards Association. It goes back to the opening of Crossfire Hurricane. It goes back to the faulty FISA application. It goes back to what we heard on that first panel from Senators Grassley and Johnson. It goes back to the suppression illegally of the Hunter Biden laptop story paid for by the U.S. taxpayers. This corruption needs to be rooted out, and it's not just about protecting the U.S. Constitution. It is most importantly about protecting the American people from the weaponization of the federal government against them. Yield back.
Lady yields back. The chair now recognizes the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to our weekly stakeout. This week, I am proud House Republicans are bringing my bill, the Rein in Inflation Act, to a vote on the House floor. The Rein in Inflation Act will deliver on House Republicans' commitment to America, holding Joe Biden accountable for his costly executive orders that fuel this historic Bidenflation crisis, a painful tax on every American. In Joe Biden's first year in office alone, he issued more executive orders than any president in my lifetime, costing taxpayers more than $1 trillion. From canceling the Keystone XL pipeline to pushing the out-of-touch and radical Green New Deal regulations, it's past time for Joe Biden to address the price tag of these costly executive orders. The Rein in Inflation Act will expose Joe Biden and demand transparency for the American people by revealing just how much Biden's executive actions are costing hardworking families. I'm proud to lead this legislation and to deliver results for upstate New York hardworking families and small businesses, as well as families and small businesses across America. House Republican Conference, we are also kicking off our Commitment to America across America. You will note that our committees are hosting hearings outside of the Beltway, hearing firsthand from communities that are impacted by these harmful Democrat policies. Hearings in Yuma, Arizona, Petersburg, West Virginia, and Midland, Texas. House Democrats refuse to show up, listen, and lead across America. House Republicans will continue to show up, listen, and lead on behalf of the American people. To talk more about this work across America, I'm proud to turn it over to one of our rising star freshmen, which we feature every week at our House Republican Stakeout, Juan Ciscomani. He's going to give an update to the border delegation trip led by Speaker McCarthy to the Tucson sector. Juan.
Stefanik.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to urge my colleagues to support my Rein in Inflation Act. During the past 2 years of one-party, far-left, radical socialist Democrat rule in Washington, led by President Joe Biden, inflation has skyrocketed to the highest level in my lifetime. You talk to any family, any small business, any farmer, any manufacturer, they will say that the inflation that they are suffering from is crippling their businesses, crippling their family budgets. It is a painful tax on every American, and Bidenflation continues to be the #1 concern I hear today across my district in upstate New York and the North Country. In House Republicans' Commitment to America, our new House majority, the people's House majority, promised to deliver and support policies to ensure our economy is strong. In fact, one of the main reasons we have this Republican is because the American people are smart. They know that the historic inflation, the highest rate of inflation in my lifetime, is a direct result of Joe Biden's executive orders and the trillions and trillions of reckless and wasteful spending from single-party Democrat rule. In fact, in Joe Biden's first year in office, he issued more executive orders than any president in my lifetime. This reckless far-left agenda cost hardworking families more than $1 trillion in taxpayer dollars and even more in the added cost of inflation. Whether it was canceling the Keystone XL pipeline on his first day in office to pushing his out-of-touch and costly Green New Deal regulations, Joe Biden has fueled this inflation crisis and caused this inflation crisis working with the previous radical socialist Democrat majority. By passing the Rein in Inflation Act, House Republicans will demand transparency for the American people by revealing just how much Biden's executive orders are costing hardworking families and the painful impact that has on inflation. What are the Democrats so afraid of? This is about transparency for the American people. And it is long past time for Joe Biden to take into account this harmful impact of this failed far-left agenda. Today, House Republicans are laser focused on fulfilling our commitment to America by
time has
I yield 30 more seconds to the gentlelady from New York.
By reining in historic inflation, historic Bidenflation, on behalf of hardworking American families and small businesses, not just in my district, but across this great nation. I yield back to Mr. Comer.
Good morning. Thank you for being here today. House Republicans remain focused on providing critical checks and oversight on the Biden administration and delivering results on our commitment to America. In the last week alone, House Republicans have delivered major legislative victories for the American people. Meanwhile, House Democrats are in total disarray in their caucus and with Joe Biden. Last week, I'm proud the House passed my bill with bipartisan support, the Rein in Inflation Act. House Republicans and 59 Democrats are rightfully putting critical checks on the Biden administration and holding Joe Biden accountable for his reckless spending fueling inflation. The Senate passed our CRA, which would block Biden's woke ESG rule. Wall Street should not use your retirement savings to fund left-wing political causes. And this week, the Senate will pass House Republicans' resolution from Andrew Clyde to restore law and order in our nation's capital and repeal D.C. Democrats' City Council soft on crime and pro-carjacking bill. Those are the words of Joe Biden. And we look forward to it becoming law after Joe Biden publicly whipped against it and then changed his stance and said he would sign it. And as a new mom, I am particularly proud of House Republicans' continued fight against Democrats' war on parents. Last week, Congresswoman Julia Letlow reintroduced the Parents' Bill of Rights with an event with Speaker McCarthy and parents and students. As promised, we are putting power back in the hands of parents who deserve a seat at the table in their kids' education. education. Our legislative victories in the new House Republican majority speak for themselves, and we are just getting started. It is my pleasure. Every week we highlight a freshman, and this week I'm going to introduce Congressman John Duarte from California, a farmer who is going to discuss House Republicans' efforts to reverse Joe Biden's flawed and burdensome WOTUS rule. John. Moving forward, do you believe the Hunter Biden laptop story is disinformation?
Well, I want to be careful about, there is an ongoing investigation that is relevant to that, so I have to be careful of what I can share on that here.
Do you believe the Hunter Biden laptop story is disinformation?
I don't think there's anything I can share on that in open setting.
Were you aware that the FBI personnel were in contact with Twitter regarding the Hunter Biden laptop story?
I don't believe FBI personnel were in contact with Twitter about the Hunter laptop story specifically. I think there were people in contact with Twitter about Russian disinformation efforts.
Of which the Hunter Biden laptop story was included, according to the FBI.
Well, I don't know exactly what you're looking at, but I'm happy to talk about what it is the FBI does and does not do with respect to social media companies.
Were you aware that the FBI had Hunter Biden's laptop since December of 2019?
I can't speak to exactly when we had a laptop available. There is, as you know, there is an ongoing investigation run by the U.S. Attorney out of Delaware from the prior administration that we continue to work very closely with.
And we have an ongoing investigation as well.
And our Baltimore field office is working very hard with that U.S. Attorney, and I expect them to pursue that case as far as it takes.
This stonewalling, Director Wray, the American people deserve answers, and this is unacceptable. Were you aware that the FBI had Hunter Biden's laptop since December of 2019?
I can't speak to exactly when we had a laptop available. There is, as you know, there is an ongoing investigation run by the U.S. Attorney out of Delaware from the prior administration that we continue to work very closely with.
And we have an ongoing investigation as well.
And our Baltimore field office is working very hard with that U.S. Attorney, and I expect them to pursue that case as far as it takes.
This stonewalling, Director Wray, the American people deserve answers, and this is unacceptable. Lastly, did you sign off on the Mar-a-Lago raid?
Well, first off, it was not a raid. It was an execution of a search warrant.
Did you sign off on the execution of the search warrant?
May I finish? Second, I don't sign off on individual search warrants in that case or in any other.
Did Attorney General Merrick Garland sign off to your awareness?
I can't speak to the Attorney General.
Was there dissent at senior levels of the FBI about the conducting of the search warrant?
I can't speak to internal discussions among the FBI or among the FBI and the Department of Justice.
Even though it's been reported in the Washington Post?
There are lots of things reported in the media.
I know, leaked from your agency. Leaked from your agency, frequently it's reported in the Washington Post.
It may or may not be accurate.
It may or may not be accurate. With that, I yield back. I also want to shift gears here regarding Judiciary Committee. I serve on the select subcommittee there, and this committee has made 50 different requests for information and documents concerning the operations and the actions of the FBI. And to date, the FBI has not complied with the Judiciary Committee's long outstanding requests for information and documents. The FBI is accountable to Congress and by extension the American people. Responding to this routine oversight is the bare minimum. And today, the FBI failed to send a witness to the Judiciary Committee hearing, saying that we had this hearing happening. Can you commit to sending a witness before the next Judiciary Committee subcommittee hearing on March 28th?
We're happy to work with you on making sure we
Can
make
you commit
information
to
available.
provide a witness?
We will, of course, make people available to the committee.
But you didn't make people available today. This is the base minimum. The agencies need to provide witnesses. Can I get a commitment? Yes, you will provide a witness.
We will work with you to make people available.
That's not a yes. So for the American people, you are having the FBI director refuse to provide a witness. Just say yes.
I'm not refusing to provide a witness. I want to be clear on that. I said we will work with you to make somebody available.
So, great. So someone will be made available.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. That's all I wanted, a yes. Biden laptop story. Based upon both of your courageous reporting, can you address that?
I mean, we saw, I mean, like I said, we don't know. I mean, so at this point, we just have to take his word on it. But what we saw was a huge amount of FBI communications to Twitter. We saw the former deputy chief of staff, the former general counsel showing up at Twitter right at the critical period. So I find a lot of suspicious activity. I would like to ask him a bunch of questions about that because I find it very suspicious and unresolved.
Mr. Taibbi, do you have comments on that?
We do know that there was a teleporter communication that had 10 documents in it just before the story broke, but we don't know what those documents were, so we can't suppose.
Well, I don't take his word for it. We have lots of examples where it has not been, they have not been accurate from that particular agency when it comes to testifying before Congress. So it is our job in this committee to get to the truth, to shine sunlight and transparency for the American people. I want to ask you both about the Aspen Digital Hack and Dump Working Group, which involved an 11-day scenario in October 2020 that began with the imaginary release of falsified records, that's what they claim, related to Hunter Biden's controversial employment by the Ukrainian energy company Burisma.
Right.
This was if they knew, because they did know. So I would like your comments, Mr. Schellenberg. These were the files that you did extensive reporting on about how concerning this is and how this is truly the definition of the weaponization against free speech and suppressing accurate reporting.
Yeah, so there's actually two things, and one of them we just discovered recently, which is that there was a Stanford Cyber Policy Institute report, which said that, which was in menacing terms, telling journalists that they should abandon the Pentagon principle. Again, this is the Pentagon Papers principle. This is the idea that if Daniel Ellsberg brings you materials he's taken from the Pentagon about how the war in Vietnam is going, the New York Times and Washington Post published those. That was considered one of the greatest moments of American journalism. Here you have Stanford Cyber Policy Center saying we should abandon that principle. You should instead make the issue about, frankly, the theories about where it might have come from. Then you had the Aspen workshop, which was attended, by the way, by New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, Wikipedia, Facebook, Twitter, many other journalists, where they basically, you read it, it's like a kind of programming of the journalists that they should not follow this longstanding journalistic principle of taking materials from a hack and leak or any other situation and take them seriously. So, I mean, you read this and it feels like a kind of brainwashing exercise that Aspen Institute and Stanford were running against American journalists and the social media companies.
Mr. Taibbi, comments?
Yes, I think there were a couple of moments in the Twitter files that really speak to a kind of larger problem. In the first Twitter files, we saw an exchange between Representative Rouhana and Vijaya God, where he's trying to explain the basics of speech law in America, and she seems completely unaware of what, for instance, New York Times v. Sullivan is. There are other cases like Bartnicki v. Vopper, which legalize the publication of stolen material. That's very important for any journalist to know. I think most of these people are tech executives and they don't know what the law is around speech and around reporting. And in this case, and in 2016, you were dealing with true material. There is no basis to restrict the publication of true material, no matter who the source is and how you get it. And journalists have always understood that. And this has never been an issue or a controversial issue until very recently.
And by the way, just one quick thing I'll add. That's the exact same strategy of the malinformation, misleading. In other words, they were saying even if the material you think is true, it could lead people to have conclusions that we don't want them to have, and therefore you should change your journalism because of that. So this is, we're so far down the slippery slope, you've crashed at that point. I mean, it's a disturbing trend in journalism, in social media, and in the relationship from the intelligence community to these organizations.
How have you been targeted since the publication of the Twitter files?
Gentlelady's time has expired. We'll give a quick answer if we can.
I mean, again, I've known journalists who suffered real brutal harms in my career, so they've said a lot of nasty things about me on Twitter, but it hasn't been so bad, I would say. The FTC thing is the only thing that's legitimately concerning, and that's not really for my sake. It's more because it's a general problem for journalists everywhere.
I've been censored on Facebook since the year 2020 for writing accurate information in an article that went viral. I remain censored. They continue to flag warnings on posts that I write that have nothing to do with the environment. And we now know that one of the US government-funded organizations has put out a report that specifically targets me and presents disinformation about my own position on climate change. And so I've got a lot at stake here.
Yield back.
Mr. Chair. We've had in a long time. And the Speaker laid out, we have hit the ground running, implementing our commitment to America based upon the 4 commitments we made to the American people. Number 1, an economy that's strong. You heard from the Majority Leader our focus on lowering energy prices and unleashing energy independence. We also passed on a bipartisan basis my rein-in inflation bill to hold Joe Biden accountable. Number 2, a nation that's safe. Certainly that's an issue I know firsthand being from New York, where we flipped 4 seats, primarily because the soft on crime policies that we are seeing in New York State. We were proud to get bipartisan support and actually get it signed into law by President Joe Biden, who switched his position when it came to nullifying the far left DC pro-criminal city law that they tried to place. Number 3, a future that's based upon freedom. I serve on the House Education Committee, and we are very excited about the Parents' Bill of Rights, which really should be a nonpartisan issue. You talk to parents across this country, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, or independents, they support making sure that parents are the primary decision makers when it comes to their kids' education. And then number 4, a government that's accountable to we the people. That starts with a Congress that works and is open to the people. We got rid of proxy voting, but also making sure that we have robust, productive, and effective congressional oversight to bring transparency and accountability to all of the federal agencies. I'm so excited that during this retreat we have some amazing guest speakers. We'll be hosting our former colleague Trey Gowdy, who is beloved across this country, and we also are featuring NFL quarterback Drew Brees. So we're excited for those speakers, and most importantly, over the course of this working retreat, we will have members-driven discussions on important issues focused on the economy, focused on national security, focused on energy independence. So this is us getting to work on behalf of the American people, and we're so excited to have such a dynamic freshman class. One of those, I'm excited to turn it over to Erin Houchin, who won a district in Indiana, and she has hit the ground running, and she was elected by her colleagues in the freshman class as their representative to the leadership table. Erin.
Mr. Cisneros, are you familiar with the tweet? It's both on the screens, it should be up there, and right behind me, by the former DODEA Chief of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Kalisa Wing. Are you familiar with the tweet? Can you please read the tweet aloud?
So exhausted at the white folks in these PD sessions. This lady actually had the audacity to say black people can be racist too. I had to stop the session and give Karen the business. We are not the majority. We don't have power. A thread, why ask for assistance?
And again, for the viewers who are watching this is the former chief of DEI for DODEA, for schools in our Department of Defense. This is wildly inappropriate and unacceptable. Would you agree with that, Mr. Cisneros?
I do agree that that is not acceptable. It's not condoned by, it's not something I would condone, and it's not condoned by DODEA or the Department of Defense.
Well, when I raised this issue, in fact, I wrote a letter to the Department of September of last year and did not receive a response. It was only when I wrote a follow-up letter on November of last year, we did finally get a response in December stating the department was conducting an inquiry into this matter. Today, 6 months after that initial inquiry, you responded 3 hours prior to this hearing, which is a trend for Biden administration officials at the last minute scrambling before these hearings, claiming that you determined Ms. Wing was speaking, quote, in a personal capacity and that her colleagues never heard her made similar comments at work. However, interestingly, in the letter, which I want to submit for the record, without objection, it also states that she has been transferred as part of headquarters restructuring. She was reassigned to another position that does not include diversity, equity, and inclusion specific responsibilities. I have a feeling that has to do with the fact that we have shined light on this. But my question for you is, will you commit to making the review and the findings publicly available to Congress and to service members?
Ma'am, you did get the letter today. I apologize that it did not come sooner, but I will say also my team has been down here the DOD team as well to talk with staff on this topic?
No, there was
The
no response to the letter. We
the
were promised
director
30
of,
days.
the
30
DOD
days
schools,
after
Tom
September
Brady.
would be October.
The director of schools, Tom Brady, was down on the Hill to talk with staff as well.
Don't cover up for the trend of the Biden administration. This is the second hearing in 2 weeks where the response to a letter delayed is given the day of or the day before the hearing with FBI Director Chris Wray. My question for you is, will you make the findings of this review publicly available to Congress and to servicemen and women?
You know, Miss Wing is a GS employee. She's not a senior executive. There are restrictions that we have to follow, but we will look into the matter as far as to see what can be shared and what can't.
Well, we're requesting that. My next question for you is, have you read Kalisa Wing's books titled, What is White Privilege? What Does It Mean to Defund the Police? What is the Black Lives Matter movement? Have you read those books?
I have not read those books.
Are you aware, however, that those books are in DOD K-12 schools throughout the country?
I do not know, I can't say with certainty, I do not know that they are in those libraries at all, or if they have been, or if they are now.
Well, they are. Do you think that's appropriate?
I don't know for a fact that they are.
They are. I'm telling you they are. That's why I asked you the question. You should know. You're a DOD official. I'm informing you. You should know the answer that they are available.
Well,
And one reason you should know that is because in her own presentation as a DOD employee at a DODEA summit, she stated, quote, "My passion work is dismantling disparate discipline systems, and I am hugely passionate about dismantling the school-to-prison pipeline. I've written a book, Promises and Possibilities, Dismantling the School-to-Prison Pipeline." Shameless plug. That's her words, end quote. So while conducting her official duties as a DODEA employee, she advertised not only her personal social media accounts, which included this tweet, her personal websites, but she advertised her personal books. Are you aware that this is illegal for DOD employees to advertise and promote their personal books, that they will profit off of those sales?
Again, this was a book that she wrote in a personal matter. It was on her personal tweet, I guess, from what I understand.
No, it wasn't on a personal
You're
tweet.
saying?
It was at a DOD summit. In her capacity presenting as a DOD official, she promoted her book, and in fact, she stated this is a shameless plug for her book. Is that illegal, and is that appropriate?
I don't know who she was talking to or what the summer was. I'm not aware with that, but I can look into it and I'll get back to you.
You seem to not know a lot of what's happening in the department. You seem to be inappropriate. So my expectation is that we'll continue educating you on what's happening in the Biden administration Department of Defense, but this is absolutely unacceptable. We expect that report, and I will take it as a result that we delivered, making sure that she should have been fired completely, but she was at least moved somewhere else, not dealing with our kids' educational systems.
Well, there are restrictions that, again, she's a GS employee. She's not a senior executive. The inquiry did find that, you know, the tweets that she made or comments that she made were not in line with the Department of Defense or DOD schools, but they were made on a personal basis. That was the result of the inquiry. And we will look into the privacy that's in there, and we will share, we will look into what we can share and what we can't share.
I'll yield back to the chair. Have you read Kalisa Wing's books titled, What is White Privilege? What Does It Mean to Defund the Police? What is the Black Lives Matter movement? Have you read those books?
I have not read those books.
Are you aware, however, that those books are in DODEA K-12 schools throughout the country?
I do not know, I can't say with certainty, I do not know that they are in those libraries at all, or if they have been, or if they are now.
Well, they are. Do you think that's appropriate?
I don't know for a fact that they are.
They are. I'm telling you they are. That's why I asked you the question. You should know. You're a DOD official. I'm informing you. You should know the answer that they are available.
Well,
And one reason you should know that is because in her own presentation as a DOD employee at a DODEA summit, she stated, quote, "My passion work is dismantling disparate discipline systems, and I am hugely passionate about dismantling the school-to-prison pipeline. I've written a book, Promises and Possibilities, Dismantling the School-to-Prison Pipeline." Shameless plug. That's her words, end quote. So while conducting her official duties as a DODEA employee, she advertised not only her personal social media accounts, which included this tweet, her personal websites, but she advertised her personal books. Are you aware that this is illegal for DOD employees to advertise and promote their personal books, that they will profit off of those sales?
Again, this was a book that she wrote in a personal matter. It was on her personal tweet, I guess from what I understand.
No, it wasn't on a personal
You're
tweet.
saying?
It was at a DOD summit. In her capacity presenting as a DOD official, she promoted her book, and in fact, she stated this is a shameless plug for her book. Is that illegal, and is that appropriate?
I don't know who she was talking to or what the summer was. I'm not aware with that, but I can look into it and I'll get back to you.
You seem to not know a lot of what's happening in the department. You seem to be inappropriate. So my expectation is that we'll continue educating you on what's happening in the Biden administration Department of Defense, but this is absolutely unacceptable. We expect that report, and I will take it as a result that we delivered, making sure that she should have been fired completely, but she was at least moved somewhere else, not dealing with our kids' educational systems.
Well, there are restrictions that, again, she's a GS employee. She's not a senior executive. The inquiry did find that, the tweets that she made or comments that she made were not in line with the Department of Defense or Judea schools, but they were made on a personal basis. That was the result of the inquiry. And we will look into the privacy that's in there, and we will share, we will look into what we can share and what we can't share.
Thank you. The American people are rightly concerned about just how fundamentally unfair and unjust the Biden administration's trillion-dollar student loan bailout and policies are for hardworking American families. Those hardworking American families who may have chosen not to go to college, or perhaps could not afford it, or worked responsibly to pay off their loans. But yet they're going to foot the bill for this trillion-dollar bailout, and they'll also feel the effects of more and more painful Bidenflation. Mr. Goldwine, in your testimony, you mentioned the Biden plan would increase inflation by 15 to 27 points while lining the pockets of the wealthy and those with advanced degrees. For the folks on the panel, just so you know, in my district in upstate New York in the North Country, approximately 3/4 of constituents that I represent do not hold a bachelor's degree or higher. That includes my immediate family members who are very successful, community leaders who are very successful, local elected officials, CEOs of successful manufacturers and small businesses. What sorts of negative impacts will nearly those 3/4 of my constituents see as a result of Joe Biden's painful policy proposal? That question is for you, Mr. Goldwine, and for you, Mr. Looney.
Well, anybody that's not benefiting directly from the debt forgiveness is going to be hurt indirectly by the higher inflation it causes. As you mentioned, we estimate about a 1/4 point increase in inflation. That means higher prices at the grocery store, higher rents, higher prices at the gas price, you name it. But the real risk is if that higher inflation pushes us into a recession. As the Federal Reserve responds by raising rates, we saw just these last couple of weeks what that can do to destabilize the banking sector, the housing sector. And if there's a big spike in unemployment, it's those without college degrees that are going to be hurt the most.
Mr. Looney.
Thank you. Well, one of the most important divisions in our country is between those who have a college degree and those that don't, in terms of how much they earn and the quality of jobs they have, whether they're married or divorced, whether they die of deaths of despair. And so, college graduates tend to be better off on average. And so, policies that transfer income to those advantaged groups and pay for it effectively among those that don't, increase inequality rather than reduce it.
Dr. Salerno, shifting gears here, the department has traditionally relied on debt-to-earnings measure for assessing whether programs led to gainful employment for their graduate, but that doesn't consider the $30 billion in Pell Grants we disperse every year that may be paying for programs that provide a negative return on investment. The Promoting Employment and Lifelong Learning Act, or the Pell Act, that I introduced along with the chair of this committee, Dr. Fox, and other members of this committee, proposed strong accountability guardrails, including measuring whether the program's price is aligned with the earnings boost that graduates receive 3 years after obtaining their credential. Is this metric something that could be applied to all programs at all institutions receiving federal student aid dollars if Congress were to rewrite gainful employment in statute?
Congresswoman, thank you for the question. I think the answer is yes, it would. A 3-year metric has a value in the sense that it gives enough runway for students to get into their career earnings, but it also limits the time of exposure to a point where we can no longer attribute their gains to something other than college, so I think it's valuable. I think it's also easy to understand. I think we understand the concept of ROI. We understand it in different capacities of our lives. The fact that it could be used here not for just one class of institutions, but for all institutions, again, improves transparency and reduces uncertainty and improves comparability.
Thank you. I yield back.
Member from New York, Ms. Stefanik, for 5
Thank
minutes.
you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Dawson, have you been to the Swanton sector of the northern border?
Yes, quite often.
Where have you been?
I was a resident of Ottawa, so Ontario, so I was up and down the upstate New York and New England area very frequently, especially along the lakes.
Have you spoken with Border Patrol officers in upstate New York or the North Country?
I have not spoken to Border Patrol officers recently from that area, no.
Well, I will tell you, I speak to Border Patrol officers all the time in my district. I represent 700,000 hardworking Americans that live in my district, and it is an abject disaster what is happening at our southern border and the impact it's having on our northern border. Dr. Dawson, are you aware that encounters at the northern border have surged up to 846% in the Swanton sector that you are so familiar with?
I think during my testimony earlier, I indicated that...
Are you aware of 846%?
That is not a number that I'm...
So you disagree with that number put out by the U.S. government?
I don't have the information to agree or disagree.
Okay, well, that is the number. Mr. Judd, because you are familiar with Northern Border Patrol officers, because I know you speak to them regularly, as I do in my district, I want to get your input. Do we have operational control over the northern border?
No, we don't. In fact, what happens is we conflate the issue. We conflate the ports of entry, and between the ports of entry, we have to subtract out the two. In fact, that's the reason why we have two different agencies that work. You have the port of entry, which is the Office of Field Operations, and then you have between the ports of entry, which is the Border Patrol. We have to take those two issues apart from each other and look at them individually.
And Mr. Judd, walk me through. I'm very familiar hearing from my constituents about the crisis on the southern border, how that has impacted the morale of Border Patrol officers up north who have been transferred over and over again to the southern border with no notice deployments. Number one, the morale impact, and number two, the fact that we do not have the personnel we need operationally along the northern border, specifically the Swanton sector.
A little over 25 years, I've never seen the morale lower in the Border Patrol than what it is today. Make no mistake, we will continue to put on the uniform. We will continue to go out and do the job that we're supposed to do. We just won't be happy about the job that we're doing because we know that we do not have the support of this administration to actually protect the American people. And then when you look at how we have taken away from the northern border to support the southwest border, it all starts on the southwest border. If we can control the southwest border, then we won't have to touch the northern border agents. But because we don't have the policy that's necessary to secure the southwest border, then the northern border gets robbed, and then it opens up the gaps that we're currently seeing.
We know when we had a secure border in this country, it was not that long ago, what tools or policies were taken away by the Biden administration that led to this crisis on both the southern and northern border?
It was actually the re-implementation of a tool, which was what we call catch and release. When you look at under President Trump, we got rid of catch and release. And when you get rid of catch and release, when you get rid of the promise that you're going to reward people for violating our laws, they're going to stop coming. We saw that under President Trump. Once that was re-implemented, that's why we saw the huge increase. If individuals know that they can violate our laws and be rewarded for violating our laws, of course it's going to happen.
My additional question is, you are all familiar, the Biden administration and Secretary Mayorkas have repeatedly claimed they have operational control of the southern border, something that the chief of the Border Patrol recently disputed in a hearing. Mr. Quinn, do you believe that we have operational control over the southern and northern border?
I can only speak to my border, and I don't believe we do. We have 58 miles of border in New Hampshire. I was at the Swanton sector on Friday. I know that they are working very hard to the west, so I'm concerned with our 58 miles. What are the resources that are there 24/7 in the event that somebody called and it was an issue of an illegal crossing, whether it's through 911 or however?
Dr. Dawson, in your, since you seem to be an expert on the Swanton sector, even though you're unfamiliar with the 840% increase that we've had in terms of encounters, do you believe that both the southern and northern border are, we have operational control?
Southern border.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Arthur.
I was there when this committee drafted the Secure Fence Act of 2006 under the definition set forth in Section 2 of that act, we don't have anything even approximating operational control. Again, as I said during my opening statement, I've never seen the border this bad in history.
Well, that's the sentiment shared with Border Patrol officers, border families in my district, and I am proud to be one of the strongest advocates for U.S.-Canadian partnership, U.S.-Canadian trade. I co-chair the Northern Border Caucus, which is bipartisan, was one of the leading advocates for making sure we implemented USMCA. We want to continue to strengthen that partnership, not at the risk of having a strong security partnership and a partnership when it comes to securing our border. I'm very confident it is not a partisan issue in my district. This administration has absolutely failed, and it's because of their failures that have caused this crisis on both the southern and northern border. With that, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Stefanik of New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask both Secretary Austin and General Milley about the unique role the 10th Mountain Division and Fort Drum play in great power competition. I recently had the opportunity to visit with Major General Anderson, who's doing a great job after the tremendous leadership by General Beagle up at Fort Drum, and we discussed General Anderson's Alpine initiative to return the 10th Mountain Division to its roots of cold weather operations and mountaineering. Given that both you, Mr. Secretary, and you, General Milley, were commanding generals at Fort Drum, you're very familiar with the post, with the unique strengths of 10th Mountain. What role do you see the 10th Mountain Division and Fort Drum specifically playing in outcompeting our adversaries in the Arctic?
I think 10th Mountain Division can play a significant role and does play a significant role in that endeavor. I would also say that they're a multi-purpose division. It can, as they've demonstrated, they can go a number of places and be very, very effective because their strength is the quality of their people and their leadership. And that's been demonstrated over and over again. So.
General Milley.
Yeah, thanks, Congresswoman. A couple of things. First, they're trained in Arctic operations, so that's a key thing. And as we know, the Arctic's opening up. Secondly, is they're light infantry, so they can rapidly deploy. In fact, it's the most deployed division in the Army. The rapid deployment is key, and that acts as a strategic deterrent. They were one of the first units we deployed to Europe. In fact, we got a unit just coming back from the 10th, and there's another unit going over from the 10th over to the Ukraine area. The third thing is they're optimized for urban combat as light infantry. They're very effective, and as the world becomes ever more urbanized, the probability is higher rather than lower that decisive fights, battles will occur in highly dense urban areas. So 10th Mountain has a lot of unique capabilities, and they bring to the fight rapid deployment, urban combat, mountain warfare, winter warfare, and it's a great outfit, it's a great port, it's a great place to work and live and serve our country.
Yeah, thank you, General Milley. And Secretary Austin, you took my line, General Milley. I always like to point out that it is the most deployed division in the U.S. Army since 9/11, and we're grateful for so many military families that I've gotten to know over many years. I want to shift gears here, still related to Fort Drum, but specifically missile defense. Iran has never been closer to a nuclear weapons capability and has demonstrated a space launch capability, which has a direct technical application to an ICBM. For over a decade, it's been U.S. policy to be ready for a third homeland missile defense site should the Iran threat mature. The previous NORTHCOM commander testified as long ago as 2015, an additional missile defense site would give us increased inventory and increased battle space with regards to a threat coming from the direction of the Middle East. And while you have both Iran increasing their development of nuclear weapons capabilities, as well as North Korea continue to develop their ballistic missile capabilities, I want to get your response to Fort Drum has been designated as a potential third site. Why that would be important to include a third homeland site to provide with more confidence to intercept any potential missile. Secretary Austin.
Well, I'll certainly defer to the work that we're doing being completed and looking at the results of that work. But certainly Fort Drum is has tremendous capability and a great community. So I think if that site is chosen, I think it would be a good choice.
That site has been chosen by the Department of Defense. That was announced a few years ago. We worked on that in the NDA. It's also current in previous NDA. Fort Drum has been designated as the potential third site. General Milley.
Potential third site.
Potential third site.
Yeah.
So, what is the process of ensuring that we're focused to meet the needs, not of, the past, but of the future, 2030s and 2040s, because it takes a long time for that infrastructure investment, for that to be potentially completed. So what is the timeline, General Milley or Secretary Austin?
I don't think a timeline has actually been established, but I can tell you that what we're talking about and what you're talking about, I think, is a project that's been out there for quite some time on the books. You're looking at probably 20 to 40 silos, something like that, and then the missiles to go with it. It would probably take a decade to actually put that in. It would take billions. I don't know exact cost figures, but it would take billions. The question is it strategically worthwhile? I personally think yes, because we have a missile threat from North Korea, but we have an arrayed system of sensors in the Western Pacific all the way to California, and we've got missile capabilities that can engage North Korea. When you're dealing with China and Russia, you're dealing with an assured second strike because of the volume. But in Iran, if they were to develop the ICBM level of missiles, which they haven't yet, but if they do, and they're developing the piece parts with space launch vehicles, and if they were to then develop a nuclear weapon to put on top of that, that's where it becomes important. Now, are they on the road to do that? I think that's a choice that people in a judgment that the intelligence community and others would have to make. I personally think developing those systems on the East Coast would be helpful, and it would further enhance the protection of the United States.
Thank you very much.
Gentlelady's time.
Gentlelady from New York, Ms. Stefanik, is recognized for 5 minutes.
As a native New Yorker, born and bred, I think it's important to note that many of the Democrats on this committee have smeared brave victims and fellow New Yorkers here today, calling them props, a circus, a performance, MAGA Broadway pops, and an underlying sham. What have Republicans focused on? We've focused on giving victims a voice. We've focused on crimes. We've focused on your story as a father, visiting your son at the hospital, seeing his face beaten in with an anti-Semitic hate crime. We're focused, Ms. Brame, on your story as a mother, grieving the loss, rightfully grieving the loss, and advocating on behalf of your son and his legacy. Ms. Harrison, we heard your story about losing your loved one. And Mr. Alba, we heard your story, just the personal challenges you've faced dealing with the consequences of the vicious crime perpetrated against you. And in addition to House Democrats belittling the victims here today, Democrats have politicized this hearing, mentioning Donald Trump 38 times. That number for Republicans is 0. We are focused on victims and making sure that we support law and order in this country. There is a catastrophic crime crisis across America, specifically in our great cities and great cities like New York. New Yorkers know it, Americans know it. And while Democrats on this committee may claim that New York is not the epicenter, look no further than the last November election where we flipped 4 congressional seats, delivering the House majority. What was the #1 issue? It was crime, because voters are smart. The people are smart. Mr. DiGiacomo, as a longtime member of law enforcement, I wanted to get your testimony today. How long have you served in law enforcement?
Approximately 40 years.
And in those 40 years, would you say the crime crisis today is worse than you've ever seen it?
That's correct.
Crime is up. Is it fair to say that it is a result of failed bail reform policies in Albany and Alvin Bragg's Day 1 memo?
100%.
And here are some important numbers. In 2022, District Attorney Bragg's first year as DA, New York City saw a 23% surge in major crimes. Is that true?
That's correct.
From 2019 to 2022, murders are up 93%.
That's correct.
From 2019 to 2022, robberies are up 43%.
Correct.
Felony assaults are up 32%.
Correct.
And it's fair to say that law enforcement strongly opposed Bragg's Day 1 memo and failed bail reform policies in Albany.
100%.
Mr. DiGiacomo, in fact, you have said, quote, Bragg gives criminals the roadmap to freedom from prosecution and control of our streets. In Bragg's Manhattan, you can arrest, deal drugs, obstruct arrest, and even carry a gun to get away with it. Can you please expound about why law enforcement opposes Alvin Bragg's Day 1 policy and opposes failed bail reform?
Well, because, again, every time a detective or a police officer puts himself or herself in harm's way, arresting a felon or anyone for any crime, they're released immediately with no consequences.
Mr. Borgen, as a family member of a victim of a heinous violent crime, your son, as you talked about, was a victim of a violent anti-Semitic hate crime committed at a pro-Israel event. Your son was jumped, beaten, and sprayed with mace. In fact, and I think it's important for the American people and my colleagues across the aisle to hear this, your son describes this as, a whole crowd of people proceeded to kick me, punch me, beat me down. I felt a liquid being poured on my face, and at first I thought I was getting urinated on, but it turned out I was getting maced and pepper sprayed. My face was on fire. That pain was worse than the concussion and all this other stuff that followed. And yet the attacker said, if I could do it again, I would do it again. And yet District Attorney Alvin Bragg gave him a sweetheart deal. What is your message to District Attorney Alvin Bragg?
Well, the man is incompetent, obviously, in the big scheme of things. But unfortunately, you know, our hands are tied. He can come to us. Said he offered him other deals. My son did not accept them. Right now, the court case is pending, and different deals are passing on from back and forth. But you know, between me and you, I lost faith in the justice system with Alvin Bragg. I don't feel anything's going to get done. Like in the other cases, also, her son's attackers walking around scot-free like nothing happened. It's a disgrace. And I just want to say something, Mr. Ivey, I compliment you. You're the only one who sat here on the Democratic side, didn't bring up Donald Trump. And you're a mensch. You talk straight. You didn't look to make partisan politics here. I want to compliment you.
Ms. Harrison, what's your message to Alvin Bragg?
I'm a walking example of not ever being whole 18 years after losing a loved one under horrific circumstances and not seeing justice. My life will never, ever be complete without Kevin, and knowing that the murderers' families are walking free, spending Christmases and Easters with their family is it's beyond comprehension. So I hope that he will pay attention to what's happening here today and realize the effect that he's having on survivors of homicide victims for the rest of their lives.
Thank you to the victims for the bravery sharing your stories. Thank you to our former law enforcement officers for your leadership. Yield back.
Gentlelady yields back.
Mr. Borgen, as a family member of a victim of a heinous violent crime, your son, as you talked about, was a victim of a violent anti-Semitic hate crime committed at a pro-Israel event. Your son was jumped, beaten, and sprayed with mace. In fact, and I think it's important for the American people and my colleagues across the aisle to hear this, your son describes this as, a whole crowd of people proceeded to kick me, punch me, beat me down. I felt a liquid being poured on my face, and at first I thought I was getting urinated on, but it turned out I was getting maced and pepper sprayed. My face was on fire. That pain was worse than the concussion and all this other stuff that followed. And yet the attacker said, if I could do it again, I would do it again. And yet District Attorney Alvin Bragg gave him a sweetheart deal. What is your message to District Attorney Alvin Bragg?
Well, the man is incompetent, obviously, in the big scheme of things. But unfortunately, you know, our hands are tied. He can come to us. Said he offered him other deals. My son did not accept them. Right now, the court case is pending, and different deals are passing on from back and forth. But you know, between me and you, I lost faith in the justice system with Alvin Bragg. I don't feel anything's going to get done. Like in the other cases, also, her son's attackers walking around scot-free like nothing happened. It's a disgrace. And I just want to say something, Mr. Ivey, I compliment you. You're the only one who sat here on the Democratic side, didn't bring up Donald Trump. And you're a mensch. You talk straight. You didn't look to make partisan politics here. I want to compliment you.
Ms. Harrison, what's your message to Alvin Bragg?
I'm a walking example of not ever being whole 18 years after losing a loved one under horrific circumstances and not seeing justice. My life will never, ever be complete without Kevin, and knowing that the murderers' families are walking free, spending Christmases and Easters with their family is it's beyond comprehension. So I hope that he will pay attention to what's happening here today and realize the effect that he's having on survivors of homicide victims for the rest of their lives.
Good morning. President Biden has been missing in action on the debt ceiling, refusing to negotiate, and putting our economy and the livelihoods of hardworking American families at risk. Even House Democrats are demanding that President Biden enter debt ceiling negotiations with Speaker McCarthy. House Republicans will pass a sensible debt ceiling solution that limits Washington's irresponsible spending, saves taxpayer dollars, and grows the American economy. President Biden must work with us, who represent the American people, to address our nation's spending and debt crisis. First, before we hear from some of my colleagues on the debt ceiling negotiation, I wanted to highlight two of our incredible members, Congresswoman Kim and Congresswoman Steele, to discuss the upcoming joint address by our ally, President Yoon of the Republic of Korea, celebrating the 70th anniversary of our critical alliance. I'll first turn it over to Representative Young.
You guys have up on the floor this week is about extending statute of limitations on pandemic unemployment benefit fraud. George Santos has been indicted. One of his indictments is for unemployment benefit fraud. Does that undermine the message you're trying to send with that bill? And then also, given all those indictments of Mr. Santos, a question for you and Chairwoman Stefanik is, should he resign?
So first of all, in regard to George Santos, he was already removed from all of his committees. There is a legal process. The charges just came out. We just saw some of them this morning. And so in America, there's a presumption of innocence, but they're serious charges. He's going to have to go through the legal process. But we're going to continue to work to root out fraud. And there's lots of it. And we're talking about tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in fraud in many federal programs. We've pointed this out. I mean, they're not even checking Social Security numbers. So you've got reports of people even in foreign countries getting taxpayer money for things that should be only available to Americans who are coming on hard times. Not to go to drug cartels or to people that just want to bilk the system. And so I hope Democrats will support us in rooting out fraud. They haven't shown an interest in it so far, but we're going to bring legislation to continue.
Does it undermine the message that you're trying to send with this bill, though, with this indictment of one of your...
Obviously, he's going to have to face the charges that he has. Again, he's got a presumption of innocence, but that court process is going to play itself out. But he's already been removed from all of his committees. And I don't know if anybody else has.
Sure, I just want to add to that. As I've said from the very beginning on questions on this subject, this legal process is going to play itself out. Unfortunately, this is not the first time a member of Congress from either party has been indicted. There are a set of rules, and as the majority leader stated, he voluntarily had stepped down from his committees. We are committed to making sure that we root out any fraud when it comes to unemployment pandemic assistance, and we're working to have support from our conference, and it's good policy, and we urge the Democrats to vote in support of it.
Yes, in the back.
Thank you so much. The NDAA markups were supposed to start this week. Republicans on the committee postponed them indefinitely. Is this related to the debt ceiling debate? And if not, do you know what's going on there, why the delay was enacted?
Yeah, right now as the debt ceiling negotiations are going on, if you even want to call them negotiations, again, we've passed a bill to address the debt ceiling. One of the things that we included was reestablishing what the amount of spending should be in Washington. We bring it back to what it was pre-pandemic. We, again, have laid out what that should be, but as we're in these final talks, I mean, there might only be 2 weeks left before we actually hit the date. So I'm hopeful that as the Speaker meets with the President and the other congressional leaders on Friday, that they can get some real specifics that get us closer to an agreement. And so for now, we're going to wait and see how that process plays out before starting the NDAA. But we've already been doing work on what those policies would look like on a National Defense Authorization Act.
Can I say as a task member?
Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I just want to say, since I am on the House Armed Services Committee, we've been working diligently at the subcommittee level and full committee level. And just as the majority leader said, we will be prepared to pass a robust NDAA. So when you talk about indefinitely, the NDAA is the one bill that every single year we've been able to deliver and pass, certainly since I've been in Congress, but for decades.
Speaker McCarthy scheduled an event later today. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib was scheduled in the Congressional Visitor Center to hold an event on Nakba, which is the day that Palestinians remarked the founding of Israel as a catastrophe. McCarthy's event is blocking that. It's a bipartisan briefing on the U.S.-Israel relationship. Any comments on that move by Speaker McCarthy to occupy that space during that time? And then on the fact that Tlaib was holding that event in the first place.
Well, the party in the majority is able to hold hearings and meetings, and I applaud Speaker McCarthy for holding a briefing for members to celebrate the 75th anniversary of Israel. America was, I think, the very first country to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. We've been such tight allies throughout their existence, and we've seen attacks and growing anti-Semitism even here in Congress, and we've been very vocal speaking out against any anti-Semitism. But I think it's important that we continue to celebrate and share with all of our members why it's so important that we have this special bond with Israel. The Speaker just came back from actually addressing the Knesset a few days ago, which is very historic. I think Newt Gingrich was the last speaker to address the Knesset. He and Prime Minister Netanyahu both spoke, and we've had a very special relationship. It's been very strongly bipartisan. Obviously you've got some elements of the Democrat Party who have become vocal against Israel. But again, we're going to stand up against any kind of anti-Semitism or any kind of attacks against Israel, and I applaud the Speaker for having a briefing that all members are able to come to. Thank you all. See you on the floor.
Thank you, Tom. I am so honored to stand here with my House Republican colleagues. Yet again, the mainstream media underestimated this House Republican majority. And yet again, House Republicans delivered results for the American people with the passage of the Secure the Border Act, the strongest border bill in the history of the United States Congress. This bill was one of our key pillars of our commitment to America. Since day one, when Joe Biden was sworn into office, Joe Biden's policies have caused this catastrophic border crisis. And it's not just a border crisis. It's a national security crisis, an economic crisis, a crime crisis, and a humanitarian crisis. And the American people know that Joe Biden's failed open border policies have turned every district into a border district and every state into a border state. In my home district in upstate New York in the North Country, we've seen an over 800% increase in illegal crossings in the Swanton sector on the northern border just in the last year. Border Patrol officers who I represent have been transferred over and over again to our southern border to deal with the unprecedented surge of illegal crossings. Fentanyl overdoses ravage communities across this country in each and every one of our districts. House Republicans' Secure the Border Act will end the Biden border crisis by finishing the wall, advancing border technology, supporting our brave Border Patrol officers, ending catch and release, and fulfilling our commitment to America, a nation that is safe. And one of the leaders for years, for decades on this issue, I'm honored to introduce my colleague, Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me
Well, thank you, Tom. It's a privilege to be here today for National Police Week. As the representative for New York's 21st Congressional District, I am proud to represent thousands of brave law enforcement officers who put their lives on the line to protect our upstate New York and North Country communities every day, 24/7. And I am always proud to back the blue. The Republican Party is the party of law and order, and this week we will consider several bills supporting our local law enforcement, including the Police Act of 2023, which was introduced by my fellow New Yorker, Congressman Andrew Garbarino. With the historic humanitarian, economic, and national security crisis occurring along our southern and northern border and the crime crisis across America, Congressman Garbarino's legislation holds illegal immigrants accountable for violence against law enforcement officers by making assaults against an officer a deportable offense. Violent crime has skyrocketed in New York and across the country, and the American people know this is because of the far left's defund the police movement and disastrous policies like we have in New York State, failed bail reform. It's one of the reasons why we won the majority, because we are pro-law and order when it comes to the New York Republicans here today. House Republicans will always and proudly back the blue. And this week, we are standing up to the Democrats' dangerous anti-police agenda. And I'm so honored that in our conference, we have many retired law enforcement officers who bring their experience and expertise to the halls of Congress every single day. And I want to introduce one of those, Clay Higgins from Louisiana. 365 days a year, 24/7. House Republicans are proudly the party of law and order, and we proudly back the blue. In fact, many of our colleagues in the House Republican Conference have previously served in law enforcement, and yesterday they joined us at our press conference to highlight the unwavering support for the men and women in blue in this new House Republican majority. While violent criminals are being put back on the streets because of Democrats' soft-on-crime policies and the defund the police movement, House Republicans are taking action to defend our communities and back the blue with a package of bills this week.
Today, Speaker McCarthy will meet with President Joe Biden, Senator Chuck Schumer, and Senator Mitch McConnell at the White House regarding the debt ceiling. Here are the facts. For over 100 days, Joe Biden has refused to offer a sensible solution to avoid defaulting on our debt. Fact 2. Every single House Democrat voted against raising the debt ceiling. Number 3. House Republicans are the only ones who have passed a reasonable solution to reining in the reckless spending in this country and reasonably raising the debt ceiling. As we have done every single week, today the conference is proud to highlight one of our newly elected freshmen, Mike Lawler, my fellow New Yorker, who flipped a district and is just a rising star in our conference. Mike.
Thank you, Chairwoman.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here this morning. Just a point of personal privilege at the top. I learned this morning of 2 deputy sheriffs from Saratoga County who were shot in the line of duty in my home district. My family and I are residents of Saratoga County and have a very close working relationship with the Saratoga County Sheriff's Office and have gotten to know so many of the deputies. Our community is shattered by this horrific news. Our entire upstate community stands strongly with all of our hardworking law enforcement who put their lives on the line every single day. We are praying for the recovery of both of those officers who are currently at Albany Medical Center, as well as their family members. These violent criminals must be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And I know that all of my colleagues stand strongly with our law enforcement officers, not only in upstate New York, but across this nation. On the debt ceiling, which I know many of you will ask today, for months, President Biden was missing in action on the debt ceiling, refusing to negotiate with Speaker McCarthy and putting our economy into jeopardy. Now, less than 10 days from a default, Joe Biden has yet to offer or accept our sensible solution that raises the debt ceiling and addresses our debt crisis. House Republicans remain the only ones who have passed legislation to responsibly raise our debt ceiling and rein in the reckless spending to save our country for future generations. This week, House Republicans are also taking action to address yet another crisis worsened by Joe Biden and extreme House Democrats' open border policies. That is the deadly fentanyl crisis. Just this past weekend, in my home county, Rensselaer County, they had to issue a warning after a spike in overdose-related deaths. Communities across this country are being devastated by these innocent lives being lost. The Halt Fentanyl Act, which will be on the floor this week, would supply law enforcement with the tools needed to keep fentanyl off our streets and deliver on a key pillar of our commitment to America, a nation that's safe. I'm now going to pass it over to one of our freshmen, as we do every single week, Max Miller from Ohio's 7th District. Max. Majority Leader, and of course, thank you to my colleagues who serve in the House Republican Docs Caucus. The American people know that President Biden and far-left Democrats' policies created a catastrophic border crisis that has allowed fentanyl to pour into our communities across this nation in record amounts. Hundreds of Americans are killed daily by this illicit drug, devastating our communities. Fentanyl is the leading cause of death among young Americans aged 18 to 49, surpassing cancer, heart disease, and car accidents. In 2022, over 109,000 people died of drug overdoses, roughly 75,000 of whom died from synthetic opioids, largely illicit fentanyl or fentanyl-related substances. When we talk about every district and every community in this country being a border district and border community, look no further than my district this past weekend in rural upstate New York, Rensselaer County, just one of 15 rural counties in my district. There were 5 illicit fentanyl poisoning deaths just this weekend. 5 families who lost loved ones. 5 families who will forever be grieving. To address this crisis, House Republicans are taking action. We're voting on the Halt Fentanyl Act, which my colleagues have worked so hard to shape and bring to the floor. And as I said, I'm honored to stand with these leaders
our healthcare experts, our medical providers who serve in Congress today, the Republicans in the Docs Caucus, who know how crucial it is to pass this bill. House Republicans will continue to fight for the American people to deliver on the goals we committed to in our commitment to America, including a nation that's safe. To do that, we must secure our borders and work to get the scourge of fentanyl out of our communities. And it's my honor to pass it along to one of the co-chairs of the Republican Docs Caucus, Dr. Burgess from Texas.
Thank you, Chair.
Good morning, everyone. After historic success last week in passing the largest deficit reduction in history, House Republicans are back hard at work delivering on our commitment to America and protecting American families from President Biden and extreme far-left Democrats' bans and burdensome regulation. Since day one in the Oval Office, Joe Biden and his administration have been waging war on American energy. Now they are targeting gas stoves, the preferred cooktop appliance for tens of millions of Americans. Sadly, this isn't new. In my home state of New York, extreme far-left Democrats, like our governor, Kathy Hochul, instituted the first statewide ban on gas stoves despite widespread bipartisan disapproval from hardworking New York families. I was proud to lead a letter alongside my New York Republican colleagues pushing back on this radical, insane, and painful overreach. This week, House Republicans will proudly pass the Save Our Gas Stoves Act and the Gas Stove Protection and Freedom Act. As the American people know, Joe Biden and his administration have used every tool available to circumvent approval from Congress to pass his costly and inflationary agenda. In 2022, the Biden administration proposed more than $1 trillion in new regulations, pushing the price onto the American taxpayer. House Republicans are once again bringing to the floor the REINS Act to prevent the executive branch's extreme overreach in the federal rulemaking process to protect the American people who are already suffering from historic inflation. As we do every week, we will feature a freshman later on in this press conference, John James, when he arrives, but I'm proud to turn it over to one of the lead sponsors of one of our key bills this week, Debbie Lesko from Arizona.
Thank you, Elise.
Thank you for being here this morning. The Biden administration continues to egregiously weaponize the federal government against Joe Biden's top political opponent. This abuse of power is rotting out numerous federal agencies. The unequal application of justice by Joe Biden's DOJ must be stopped. There cannot be one set of rules if your last name is Biden or Clinton and another set of rules for everyone else. House Republicans will continue to deliver much-needed oversight to cut out the rot in these federal agencies and deliver accountability and transparency for the American people as we continue to work hard to implement our commitment to America. Last week, while it should not have taken a threat of contempt, the House Oversight Committee successfully demanded and reviewed critical documents from the FBI regarding Joe Biden's corruption. This week, we will hold the Biden administration accountable by standing up for the American people to stop the outrageous and really insane ban on gas stoves, a bad idea that started in New York that is now being embraced by every Democrat and the Biden administration. We will pass the REINS Act and the Separation of Powers Restoration Act of 2023, and House Republicans will stand up for Second Amendment rights with H.J. Res. 44, a resolution restoring constitutional rights, especially for our disabled veterans, our wounded warriors. Here to speak about so many of our legislative items on the floor this week. As we do every week, we highlight a freshman. This freshman is just incredible. His military service, his success starting businesses that work with our military every day. He's a colleague of mine on the House Armed Services Committee and a true rising star from Florida, Corey Mills.
Conference Chair, Elise Stefanik.
Well, thank you to our whip and this entire leadership team. I also want to thank all of the members of the House Republican Conference. Today is a historic day. House Republicans have delivered yet another result on our commitment to America, a nation that is safe. This is particularly important to me in my district. I've been on the Armed Services Committee since I was first elected. I'm a senior member, a former subcommittee chair and ranker, and I have the honor of representing the 10th Mountain Division at Fort Drum, the most deployed division in the U.S. Army since 9/11. This This NDAA strengthens our national security. It invests in our men and women in uniform. It invests in our military families. There are a number of provisions that I'm proud to have delivered. Tens of millions of dollars of investment in missile defense that will go at Fort Drum in upstate New York. The Service Member Parents' Bill of Rights that got bipartisan support in committee and is in the final bill. Investment in military housing and military child care, as well as the largest pay raise increase in the last 20 years. I'm so honored to serve with so many newly elected members on the House Armed Services Committee. One of our rising stars, and you're going to hear from two today, is Jen Kiggins, who is a Navy helicopter pilot, a former state senator, and the representative for Virginia Beach. Jen. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Last week, the mainstream media once again underestimated the House Republican majority, and we once again delivered results for the American people, passing a strong National Defense Authorization Act. The American people are fed up with the radical, far left, and failed policies of Joe Biden and House Democrats. I also want to comment on the breaking news. We have yet again another example of Joe Biden's weaponized Department of Justice targeting his top political opponent, Donald Trump. And this week, I want to highlight our oversight work on this two-tiered, fundamentally un-American system of justice. We will be hearing from credible IRS whistleblowers who have provided evidence showing how the Department of Justice interfered into the investigation into Hunter Biden with a delay, divulge, and deny campaign that ultimately shielded and protected him. There cannot be one set of laws if your last name is Biden and another set of laws for law-abiding Americans. As I said, this is a two-tiered system of justice that is fundamentally un-American. We will also have a hearing later this week on the Select Committee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government to examine the federal government's role in censoring Americans and focus on the Missouri v. Biden case and big tech's collusion with out-of-control government agencies to silence speech of Americans. Accountability is here, and House Republicans are committed to rooting out the corruption inside Joe Biden's federal agencies. On the House floor, legislatively, we have a robust agenda. We'll be voting on key legislation ensuring America's aviation superiority through the FAA Reauthorization Act, and we'll be keeping illegals out of children's schools through the Schools Not Shelters Act. We're also honored to welcome friend and long-standing ally, Israeli President Isaac Herzog, to Congress tomorrow to commemorate the 75th anniversary of Israel's statehood. My House Republican colleagues and I look forward to hearing from President Herzog and continuing our strong work advocating for Israel and its people. This is in stark contrast to the vile anti-Semitic comments you hear coming out from some of the prominent leaders within the Democrat caucus. Every member should condemn those statements of Representative Jayapal. As we do every week, we're highlighting some of our freshman members who are rising stars and are leading legislation. I want to first start with Mike Collins from Georgia's 10th District, who is on the T&I committee, and he's focused on FAA reauthorization. Mike. Well, thank you all for coming today. What a historic and wonderful speech we just heard from President Isaac Herzog. It is my honor and pleasure on behalf of the House Republican Conference and Speaker McCarthy to welcome Israel's President Isaac Herzog to Congress today to celebrate the 75th anniversary of Israel's statehood. As one of our strongest allies, closest friends, and only democracy in the Middle East, Israel's special relationship with the United States is and forever will be crucial, especially as our adversaries are increasingly emboldened around the world due to Joe Biden's weakness on the global stage. Since 1948, Israel has remained resilient in the face of its opposition and oppressors as it stands as a role model for the advancement of global democracy. This May, I was honored to help lead a bipartisan House Intelligence Committee delegation to Israel to commemorate the anniversary of Israel's sovereignty and echo our strong support for Israel's right to defend itself. It is disappointing and inexcusable that Democrat members of Congress use their platforms to disseminate harmful and shameful anti-Semitic rhetoric, choosing to align themselves with Israel's aggressors and Iranian-backed terrorist groups. And the silence from Democrat The silence from Democrat leadership is deafening. The silence from the White House is deafening. House Republicans proudly condemned anti-Semitic rhetoric yesterday, and it is telling that a number of Democrats voted no on that resolution. In fact, today, many chose to boycott today's address. That is shameful. It is un-American. God bless the United States of America, and God bless Israel. I'm so proud to stand here with so many of my House Republican colleagues here today, and I'm proud to turn it over to the Majority Leader, Steve Scalise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Morris, isn't it true that your October 2020 Hunter Biden laptop from hell story has proven to be 100% factually accurate?
I was 27 when I published that story. It better have been.
Isn't it true that the FBI obtained Hunter Biden's laptop a full 10 months before your story broke?
That's correct, according to the subpoena that I published.
Isn't it also true that we now know that the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force coerced social media companies into an alleged forthcoming Russian, quote, hack and leak operation, and as a result, illegally censored the Hunter Biden laptop story? Isn't that true?
Yes.
And this forced censorship by government agencies like the FBI was paid for by the taxpayer, since the taxpayers fund the FBI. Isn't that true?
Yes.
And Hunter Biden's laptop from hell, it has everything. It's a hellhole and cesspool of corruption and criminal conduct. It has hard drugs, prostitution, pornography, money laundering. It has Biden family shell companies, communist Chinese, corrupt foreign government deals for tens of millions of dollars in exchange for access to the Biden family. The Hunter Biden laptop from hell has all of this, correct?
Yeah.
And the American people are smart. They know that this was not a hack and dump. This was illegal government censorship to protect and prop up Joe Biden on the eve of the 2020 election. And according to polling, of people who were now made aware of the Hunter Biden laptop story, 53% would have changed their vote, including 61% of Democrats. So do you agree that the censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop story was determinative in the 2020 election, Ms. Morris?
Yeah, there are various polls that say that that there would have been a change in the outcome of the election, and obviously it's immediately relevant to a decision on who to vote for, so obviously.
And do you believe that this government censorship was election interference?
Yes, any censorship of speech prevents your ability to think clearly. Yes, of course, yes.
Mr. Kennedy, I want to ask you specifically about the Hunter Biden laptop story. The total blackout on all social media outlets as well as telecom. You couldn't text the link to the Hunter Biden laptop story. This specifically was a form of election interference by the U.S. government in the 2020 election.
I don't know enough about it. I know that there was censorship on that story and other stories that, presumably could have changed people's minds about the election.
And we know the polling demonstrates that now. People have said they would have changed their vote had they been made aware of the Hunter Biden laptop story. Isn't that correct?
I am not aware of that, but I'm not surprised.
Mr. Sauer, I want to turn to you. I want your reflection on this form of government censorship, specifically in the 2020 election, as a form of election interference, and what I believe is some of the, most egregious political scandals that, I will live through in my lifetime. Mr. Sauer, what are your reflections?
I strongly agree with your characterization of that form of censorship as election interference. The evidence in our case strongly supports that. It strongly supports, and actually we have judicial findings now, that the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story was done at the instigation of federal officials in the FBI at a very high level of that organization. It was an orchestrated campaign of deception that was anticipatory, it was planned in advance, and it was, I think, consummated with the testimony that I hadn't seen before that's been put up today from Ms. Demlow, characterizing how, at the very end, the FBI then clammed up at the last minute after spending months of seeding the record in these endless, ceaseless meetings with social media platforms about there's a hack and dump coming, it's going to involve Hunter Biden. Then when it actually came, they said, well, no comment. Our judge focused on that particular issue as kind of the coup de grace in this form of election interference.
Thank you. My time's expired. Good morning. Welcome back. I hope you all had a productive August. We certainly did as House Republicans, and we're ready to get back to work this September. Yesterday, as you know, Speaker McCarthy announced House Republicans' intention to pursue an impeachment inquiry of Joe Biden. This is about transparency and answers for the American people, and ultimately accountability for what I believe will uncover the biggest political corruption scandal in our nation's history. For the past 8 months, through the course of our constitutional oversight duties, House Republicans have uncovered that Joe Biden has lied to the American people about his knowledge and involvement in his family's foreign business dealings, and that he has potentially committed multiple impeachable offenses. House Republicans' investigations have uncovered evidence showing Joe Biden repeatedly lied to the American people about his knowledge and involvement with his son's foreign business dealings. When Joe Biden was vice president, he joined dozens of Hunter Biden's business meetings by phone and in person. Detailed banking records show that the Biden family and their business associates received $20 million in payments from foreign actors in places like Russia, China, Ukraine, and Romania, including payments during Joe Biden's time as vice president. More than 150 transactions involving the Biden family and other business associates were flagged as suspicious activity by U.S. banks. And a highly credible FBI source alleges that Joe Biden received $5 million in exchange for pressuring for the firing of a Ukrainian prosecutor who was investigating the Ukrainian natural gas firm that Hunter Biden was on the board of, Burisma. These are allegations of abuse of power, obstruction, and corruption, and they warrant further investigation by the House of Representatives, which is why the Speaker has directed the House committees to open a formal impeachment inquiry into President Biden. The American people deserve transparency, and this impeachment inquiry is an important next step to deliver transparency, facts, and accountability. We are returning, as I said, from very successful and productive August district work periods where members were able to discuss with their constituents our efforts to deliver on our commitment to America, an economy that's strong, a nation that's safe, a future built on freedom, and a government that's accountable. We heard firsthand about the problems facing our communities, including the destructive border crisis that is raging in my home state in New York. Over the August work period, I was proud to lead a bipartisan congressional delegation to the Indo-Pacific and spoke with government and military leaders from our key allies and partners in Japan, Singapore, and Thailand about the looming threat of communist China. Funding our military and bolstering our defense capabilities has never been more critical, which brings me to this week on the floor. House Republicans will tackle head-on passing our defense appropriations bill to counter communist China, eliminate wasteful woke programs infiltrating our military at the Biden administration's ordering, and supporting our brave service members with the largest pay raise ever. Today, we are joined by, I'm going to first turn it over to Chairman Jamie Comer for an update on oversight.
Thank you, Chair Stefanik.
Good morning, everyone. Some of our other members will be joining us. The American people know that as a result of the Biden administration and Democrats' failed far-left policies, the national debt just reached $33 trillion. The border crisis is raging across the country, including in my home state in New York, and inflation continues to hurt hardworking Americans, families, small businesses, farms. It's still the #1 issue I hear across my district. Members of the House Republican Conference have been working tirelessly to come together to pass a 30-day continuing resolution with important policy riders to secure the border, including ending catch and release, restarting the Remain in Mexico policies of the Trump administration that were very effective, increasing detention capacity, and requiring safe third country agreements for illegal immigrants seeking asylum, as well as resuming the construction of the border wall. Joe Biden's open border policies have turned every community to a border community, devastating my home state of New York, and we know from our Texas and southern border colleagues this has been an existential issue for years. Importantly, the CR includes
It cuts non-discretionary spending by 8%. It fully funds the disaster relief fund and includes language to give the DOD much-needed flexibility for the duration of the CR. This 30-day extension allows us to continue our hard work in the appropriations process to rein in reckless spending and ensure that we are good stewards of taxpayer dollars. In addition, this week we will also vote on a resolution condemning the unconstitutional action of New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham that suspended open carry and concealed firearms in New Mexico. This is a gun ban that deprives the citizens of New Mexico of their God-given constitutional right to bear arms. We are joined here today by some of the key negotiators and really leaders within our conference who have been working tirelessly through the weekend. They're going to continue working. Dusty Johnson, we have Chip Roy and Stephanie Bice to talk about the plan to avoid a government shutdown and secure the borders. First, I'm going to hand it over to our whip, Tom Emmer.
Thank you, Elise.
Good morning, everyone. A new national NBC poll shows voters overwhelmingly trust Republicans over Democrats on the economy, border security, and crime. And on the question of who is best fit to handle the economy, Republicans have a 21-point margin, the highest margin in the history of when the question has been asked. In addition, according to an even more recent Morning Consult poll, voters say that the Democrat Party is more extreme than Republicans by an almost double-digit margin. And of course, this weekend, a new ABC Washington Post poll shows Joe Biden trailing the Republican frontrunner President Trump by 10 points. Republicans continue to show why we were brought to Washington to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars and combat the many crises created by Joe Biden and far-left Democrats' policies, especially the raging border crisis. Last month alone, our southern border saw over 230,000 encounters. It is time for Democrats to work with Republicans to secure the border, and the majority of voters agree. Last night was a big night. House Republicans passed the rule to bring 4 appropriations bills to the House floor for consideration. These appropriation bills include many conservative wins for the American people and rein in extreme Democrats' reckless spending. Our Homeland Security Appropriations Bill secures the border by increasing the number of Border Patrol agents to 22,000 and finishing the wall on our southern border. It also prohibits funding for Joe Biden's failed open border policies that have led to a border crisis across America. Our Defense Appropriations Bill, it eliminates woke DOD programs. It cuts $20 billion from Joe Biden's wasteful budget and redirects funding to war-fighting needs. And it gives our brave service members a historic pay raise. Our State and Foreign Ops Appropriations Bill protects life by including the expanded Mexico City policy. It prohibits funds for groups facilitating illegal immigration to our border, and it counters Communist China's aggression. And our Ag Appropriations Bill prohibits foreign adversaries like Communist China from buying up American farmland. This is an important bill that I've worked on for a number of years. And it eliminates funding for radical Green New Deal policies, and it terminates Joe Biden's Waters of the U.S. rule. From protecting American values at home to ensuring our national security abroad, House Republicans are committed to curbing Joe Biden's reckless spending and delivering results for the American people, especially securing the border. I now am honored to hand it over to one of our appropriators, Michael Cloud, from the state of Texas. Michael.
Chair, Elise Stefanik.
Thank you, Tom. As we face this challenge, Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer, House Democrats showed zero leadership. House Republicans will continue to step up to lead. Under the leadership of our Speaker, this leadership team, but most importantly, all the members of the House Republican Conference, we get the job done and deliver on behalf of the American people, keeping the government open and, importantly, continuing the appropriations process to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. And this was despite House Democrats' attempts to delay, to obstruct, and to even pull the fire alarm to stop this important vote from happening. We're going to continue to stand up on behalf of the American people, and despite being underestimated every week, we see you every single week and you underestimate us, we will continue to get the job done on behalf of our constituents across America. And I'm proud to turn it back over to the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. Mr. Speaker Pro Temp, Madam Clerk, colleagues, on behalf of the House Republican Conference, I rise today to nominate the gentleman from Ohio, Jim Jordan, as Speaker of the People's House. We are at a time of great crisis across America, a time of historic challenges in this very chamber, and a time when heinous acts of terror and evil have been committed against our great ally, Israel. As this body convenes for the sacred responsibility to elect the next Speaker of the People's House, I am reminded of the Book of Esther. For such a time is this. Jim Jordan will be America's Speaker for such a time as this. A time when hardworking American families are struggling under the vice of inflation, not able to afford groceries, heat, or gas because of the trillions and trillions of dollars of reckless spending by failed far-left government. A time when millions are being illegally trafficked and smuggled across our southern and northern borders due to the catastrophic and inhumane wide-open borders of Joe Biden. A time when violent crime is skyrocketing across America, destroying our great cities, suburbs, and small towns, where people no longer feel safe in their homes or in their communities. A time when American energy production has been crushed by Joe Biden's radical, failed, far-left policies, causing seniors, farmers, and families to pay more at the pump and struggle with skyrocketing utility bills. A time when the federal government is weaponized against we the people, who they are supposed to serve, stripping us of our God-given constitutional rights and wrongfully targeting conservatives, Catholics, and even parents at school board meetings. And a time when the people of our closest and most precious ally, Israel, suffered the bloodiest day since the Holocaust, with acts of inhumane evil committed by Hamas terrorists backed by Iran, grotesque atrocities, the beheadings of babies, rapes, kidnappings, and slaughter of women, children, and the elderly, and Israelis and Americans taken hostage. We are here in this very chamber for such a time as this. Jim Jordan will be we the people speaker for such a time as this. Our friend and colleague Jim Jordan is a patriot. He is an America First warrior who wins the toughest of fights, going after corruption and delivering accountability at the highest levels of government on behalf of we the people. Jim is the voice of the American people who have felt voiceless for far too long. Whether as Judiciary Chair, conservative leader, or representative for his constituents in West Central Ohio, whether on the wrestling mat or in the committee room, Jim Jordan is strategic, scrappy, tough, and principled. He is a mentor, a worker, and above all, he is a fighter. And the American people know, we know, that Jim Jordan is a winner on behalf of the American people. Almost 10 years ago, many of us sat with our colleague Jim Jordan in this very chamber when Prime Minister Netanyahu delivered his historic joint address, which some of our colleagues across the aisle shamefully boycotted. Bibi pointed out that in this very chamber, we serve under the watchful gaze of Moses. He said, quote, "Overlooking all of us in this chamber is the image of Moses. And before the people of Israel entered the land of Israel, Moses gave us a message that has steeled our resolve for thousands of years. Be strong and resolute, neither fear nor dread them." He went on to say, "My friends, may Israel and America always stand together, strong and resolute. May we neither fear nor dread the challenges ahead. May we face the future with confidence, strength, and hope." End quote. On behalf of the American people, let's face the future with confidence, strength, and hope. Let's elect Jim Jordan, our Speaker of the People's House, for such a time as this. And I yield back. Mr. Speaker Pro Temp, Madam Clerk, colleagues, on behalf of the House Republican Conference, I rise today to nominate the gentleman from Louisiana, Mike Johnson, as Speaker of the People's House. We convene this esteemed body today at a time of great crisis across America, a time of unprecedented challenges in this hallowed chamber, and a time when our most precious ally, Israel's very existence, is under attack from forces of evil. Yesterday, our dear colleague, our former conference chair, our chair of Energy and Commerce, Cathy McMorris Rodgers, nominated Mike Johnson in our conference. And she put it best, and I want to quote her today. She said, quote, "Trust has been broken and we have come to a standstill. How do we restore trust between members, leadership, and ultimately between Congress and we the people?" Cathy went on to say, "There's a sense that it cannot be business as usual." She went on to note, above the Speaker's chair in the House chamber is our nation's motto, "In God we trust." Ms. McMorris Rodgers went on to say, "The times in which we are living demand boldness, unity, and transformational leadership that begins with trust in God and each other. Trust is when the magic happens." In the story of King David, we are reminded that man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart, end quote. Today is the day that House Republicans will humbly look in our hearts and elect Mike Johnson as Speaker of the People's House. A man of deep faith, Mike epitomizes what it means to be a servant leader. A deeply respected constitutional lawyer, Mike has dedicated his life to preserving America's great principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Mike is a titan on the Judiciary Committee and a dedicated member of the House Armed Services Committee. And as vice chair of our conference, he has united all of our members to speak clearly and boldly on behalf of the American people. A friend to all and an enemy to none, Mike is strong, tough, and fair, and above all, Mike is kind. And at this very moment, this Republican conference knows that we live in perilous times and the American people are hurting. Families are struggling under the pain of inflation caused by reckless far-left spending, unable to afford groceries, heat, or gas. We have an inhumane open border with millions illegally smuggled and trafficked, and tens of thousands of children lost in the chasm of the incompetence and negligence of the Biden administration. Israel is under attack by Iranian-backed Hamas terrorists committing atrocities, with Israelis suffering the bloodiest days in modern memory. Crime is skyrocketing on our streets, while there are vicious calls from the left to defund our great men and women in blue. American energy production has been crushed by Joe Biden's radical, failed, far-left Democrat policies, causing seniors, farmers, and families to pay more at the pump, And Americans fundamentally understand that the federal government has been illegally weaponized against we the people, shredding the Constitution, targeting conservatives, parents, yes, I'll say it again. The federal government has been illegally weaponized against we the people, shredding the Constitution, targeting conservatives, parents, and even Joe Biden's top political opponent. The people are looking to this great chamber to save America, and save America we will. And as we embark on the path ahead, I am reminded of Galatians 6:9. And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. House Republicans and Speaker Mike Johnson will never give up. Today is the day we get this done. May God bless our next Speaker, Mike Johnson. May God bless the United States of America. And I yield back. Well, welcome back, everyone. It's great to see you. House Republicans are unified and hitting the ground running under the new leadership of Speaker Mike Johnson. After earning unanimous support on the House floor, Speaker Mike Johnson has truly hit it out of the park in the People's House, and we are proud to stand with him on this leadership team. House Republicans overwhelmingly passed our resolution showing our unequivocal support for Israel on the House floor, and both Speaker Johnson and Majority Leader Scalise were widely praised for their strong statements over the weekend at the Republican Jewish Coalition in Nevada. Let us be clear, House Republicans will always stand by our precious ally Israel, and we will speak loudly and clearly when it comes to standing against the heinous rise in anti-Semitism, both at home and abroad. We proudly stand with Israel instead of Joe Biden's army of IRS agents, and shame on Joe Biden for threatening to veto this critical Israel aid package. In addition, House Republicans passed multiple conservative appropriations bills in less than 1 week, and we're working to bring more bills to the floor in the coming days. So many of the press said it couldn't be done, and yet House Republicans continue to deliver. And I also wanted to take a moment to highlight the bombshell evidence damning Joe Biden uncovered by our Oversight Committee. Bank records showing Joe Biden received $40,000 in laundered money from communist China in a form of a personal check from the account of his brother direct to Joe Biden. Remember when the White House desperately said that Joe Biden didn't discuss business with his family, and then they had to clean that up? And then they desperately corrected, saying that they were not involved in this family business. Both statements are false and should be reported as such. Joe Biden is clearly compromised, and the American people know it. House Republicans will continue to follow the facts to ensure accountability for the American people and deliver legislative results under this new era of leadership with Speaker Mike Johnson. With that, I'm honored to turn it over to my colleague, our whip, Tom Emmer.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Ms. Stefanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of our witnesses for joining us today for this very important hearing on the abhorrent rise of anti-Semitism on our college campuses. Hamas's barbaric terrorist attacks against innocent Israeli civilians on October 7th shocked the conscience of the free world. And in fact, this morning, we began with a viewing, working with the Israeli embassy, of the horrific, heinous atrocities committed by Hamas terrorists against Jewish civilians, babies, the elderly, young people at a festival, innocent civilians. These were atrocities. These were met, unfortunately, with callous cruelty at universities across America, including at my alma mater, Harvard University. Instead of leading with moral clarity and condemning Hamas's terrorist attacks, university administrators at Harvard and other institutions failed their students through enabling the promulgation of horrific anti-Semitism, which has now evolved into violent attacks against Israeli and Jewish students. As the world watched in horror after October 7th, over 30 radical student organizations at Harvard released a joint statement outrageously claiming that Israel was entirely responsible for the Hamas terrorist attacks carried out against innocent Israeli civilians. Unfortunately, following this statement, Harvard leadership remained silent for 2 days, allowing their silence to create a vacuum that was filled by the voices of repugnant actions of the anti-Semitic student organizations. My question, and I'll begin with Mr. Marcus, what role should university leaders play in condemning clearly and explicitly anti-Semitic statements like the one that the Harvard student organizations posted after October 7th? And what actions should administrators take to root out anti-Semitism on campuses across America?
At a minimum, they should condemn anti-Jewish harassment with the same vigor as they do other forms of discrimination, and we're not seeing that at Harvard or in other places. But beyond that, when you see 30 student groups who are celebrating atrocities like that, you need to have tough conversations throughout your university about what you are doing to harbor this. At Harvard University, we, on behalf of 3 clients, had found discriminatory conduct which the university agreed was a violation of their own policies, and we're not seeing significant responses to that. When administrators fail to address acknowledged anti-Semitic activity, they should not be surprised when it gets even worse.
My follow-up, Mr. Marcus, is how have you seen the curriculum at American institutions of higher education shaped to foster these environments where hatred has been cultivated among the student body, and specifically curriculum that calls for the eradication of the State of Israel and the genocide of the Jewish people?
Let me give you just one example, and that's Middle East Studies programs that are funded under Title VI of the Higher Education Act by the Congress of the United States. There is now legislation on the books that requires Middle East Studies programs to certify that there will be a balance of perspectives and a diversity of views. And yet, what, if anything, is done to ensure that's happening? I would certainly like to see scoring of the applications. I would like to see some follow-up. I would like to see action when institutions fail to honor the commitments that they are making in writing to the U.S. government.
I want to submit for the record, Mr. Chair, the letter dated October 13th of Republican members of the House and Senate who are also graduates of Harvard University. I was proud to lead this letter condemning the failure of the administration to speak out explicitly and clearly. I've called for the resignation of President Claudine Gay, and we will continue standing up with moral clarity that is so very much needed on college campuses in this country and around the world. And I yield back.
No objections.